It's not that we aren't a better force, but we're not ready for that yet. And so my hypothesis from the beginning of this report, as we laid it all out, is that at that time, this is over a year ago, if you didn't use the overwhelming might of the American power that we bring and the technology we bring, if you just said, okay, take your best Army Brigade combat team or Marine regiment and give them the mission to go do a relief in place of a Ukrainian brigade as it sits right now in the forward lines, swap them out in essence, and leave the environment the same, which we would never do. If you did that at that time, I argued, and I stand by it today, that U.S. brigade would be combat ineffective in 72 hours, just because they would not be ready for that.
Team, welcome to another week in the Mops and Mo's universe, a big week in the Mops and Mo's universe, because perhaps thanks to this platform, but maybe certainly part of this platform, Pose is dead. Sort of.
I don't think we're no.
Add some nuance.
We'll just add some nuance. Yeah. Pose itself, I am actually not entirely opposed to. I think it's a potentially useful tool in some scenarios. People who've not been following along.
By the way.
Yeah, Pose is a running technique. It's in the umbrella category of gravitational running techniques.
Correct.
But to get people up to the speed on the story,
run us through it.
Nice. A few years ago, as H2F doctrine was being written, one of the key authors of that doctrine was a huge fan of the Pose method of running. And I think at this point, I can speak more freely than I was able to speak at that point. So I will just bluntly say there were at least a couple colonels who I am not 100% certain, but I am like 99.9% sure they were double dipping and making money on the side, working for Pose method, while also writing the doctrine that made Pose method the Army's official-ish method of running technique instruction. I was upset about that. I voiced some of my concerns in work settings because I was involved in that kind of stuff. Nobody took my concerns particularly seriously because I was a fairly junior person in that setting. So then I decided to start talking about it on Mops and Mo's. And that's when shit hit the fan. We were about to do an episode on it and I was asked not to. This would have been like 2023.
This was a while ago. I remember this text.
Yeah, this is very early days for the podcast. I was asked not to. I agreed not to on the condition that there would be an investigation on the topic. I believe there was an investigation on the topic. I don't exactly know where that went. But like a full year later, I noticed that like no action had still really been taken. So I was like, you know what? My risk tolerance is higher these days. We're going to send it. We're going to do an episode on this topic. And all of this is like a little bit directly relevant. This is a nice transition to today's episode because the person coming on was my boss's boss's boss at the time. I think I got that right.
I think so.
Thankfully did not fire me as I was like kicking the hornet's nest related to Pose method at the time, which was like a problem for the place I worked. But as of last month, a revision to ATP 7-22.1 was published, and it specifically says the purpose of this revision, other than changing things from ACFT to AFT, was to remove the Pose method.
Boom.
So we're not quite done. I think there might still be some drills in ATP 7-22.2 that still need to be removed. But we're mostly there on removing what I would consider an illegal endorsement of a non-federal entity, likely the direct result of people crossing some lines professionally as they were both doctrine writers and practitioners.
What was the it wasn't armyrunning.com, but like one
militaryrunning.com.
Military running.
And let's check. As of this morning,
still there.
It was working. When I was at work, it wasn't working for a little bit, so I don't know if they made some changes. Let's see. Have they made any? No, the website is still covered in stuff saying that like holistic health and fitness makes Pose method the official thing. It has a picture of FM7-22 on their website. Like, and you can, I would have to hope that like whoever was making this website had to think like, is it weird for me to post a picture of a military document as an ad for my company? Like, is anything weird happening here?
I don't think they thought that at all.
And just to add like a tiny little bit of nuance, I'm actually fine with like people going and learning the pose method to be a tool in their toolkit of potentially coaching running. I'm just not fine with like senior military leaders saying like, this is the official way the Army does it. Go give your money to the Romanovs.
So yeah, we fixed that. On to the next. But hey, you know what? Speaking of things that are messy, what certainly comes to mind.
That's not the transition, man. The transition is that like
Ukraine is messy.
I get what you're doing, but like the transition is that like
you do the transition this week. Back up.
I tried to set it up earlier, but at the time I was digging into the pose method, my commanding general was this week's guest.
Hey.
Major General John Kline graduated from Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania in 1992 and commissioned as a field artillery officer. I did not actually know that about him until doing some of this background stuff. Served 3 years as a fire support officer and later an MLRS platoon leader before transferring to the aviation branch. I always knew him as an aviator. He stayed in that branch until his promotion to Major General. Major General Kline commanded tactical aviation units at the company, battalion, and brigade levels. His command assignments include Alpha Company, 5th Battalion, 158th Aviation Regiment in Germany, 5th Battalion, 101st Aviation Regiment, Task Force Eagle Assault in Fort Campbell, and the 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade located at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia. In combat, General Kline served as the executive officer for 5th Battalion, 101st Aviation Regiment in Tikrit, Iraq from 2005 to 2006, Deputy Brigade Commander for 101st Combat Aviation Brigade in Bagram, Afghanistan in 2008, Battalion Commander of 5th Battalion, 101st Aviation Regiment at FOB Wolverine near Qalat, Afghanistan, 2010 to 2011, and Commander of Task Force Forge in Helmand, Afghanistan from 2015 to 2016. Pretty uniquely, and this was just prior to him being my CG, he also represented the United States in direct communication with the Taliban Political Commission in Doha, Qatar in 2021.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And then probably most relevant to some of our podcast material and where people will remember his name, he was my commander when I was at the Center for Initial Military Training. That was his final major command. And in that capacity, he played a pivotal role in overseeing the implementation of both the ACFT and H2F. After leaving that command, but before retiring, he was the Army's lead for the Ukraine-Russia lessons study, focusing on capturing the lessons from that conflict. And that is where we start and spend most of our time for today's conversation.
And I think we even said this in the closing comments, and I know we say it a lot, but like, man, was this a cool conversation. We have been talking about wanting to talk about Ukraine for quite some time, and that's not in any way, shape, or form meant to be like a political angle. I think we're both just genuinely curious because, again, like concepts like H2F exist to prepare service members for warfare, presumably. And we have a modern war happening right now. And we kind of like we had circled it, we touched on it, but we had never really been able to talk to somebody who literally like ran the study for the American military to better understand what was going on over there. I think the takeaway, and hopefully you hear this when you finish the conversation, like a lot of like most people are going to die. Like it's pretty brutal. And I'm laughing, but like seriously, it's harsh. Which, quite frankly, is as somebody who does human performance stuff like on a daily basis, it does reframe the way you think about these things. And we asked him some of those questions directly, which were to say, like, you know, you've done this study, the lessons have been learned, but like, how do you teach military members like the truth of all this without them having to go through all of this carnage themselves. And that's kind of the crux of this conversation. So, yes, this is a human performance podcast at its core, but the conversation today, I think, if we wanted to kind of put an overarching theme on it, is like, what are we actually preparing these people for? Like, what does warfare today and potentially tomorrow like look like? And hopefully with that, you too can step away from this and ideally gain a better sense of like, man, we're not jumping into Normandy anymore, guys. There's drones amongst us.
The way we came to this episode was just like a pretty straightforward LinkedIn post he put up that got me pretty stoked. They studied a lot of things, a lot of the drone stuff, a lot of the tech stuff, a lot of the intel stuff, a lot of the maneuver warfare stuff, the trench stuff, all that. But General Kline's takeaway, and maybe this comes from like all of his involvement with H2F and the ACFT and things, was just that he doesn't think people fully comprehend the physical demands or just the human demands on soldiers operating in these kinds of environments. So that was the starting point for it, was like, we really do need to reckon with a better understanding of what it takes to operate in modern conflict type of environments.
Yeah, which was interesting to me because, and maybe this is because it's kind of Call of Duty generation, right? Like, it's high tech, warfare looks a certain way. And I think even off the back of just this one conversation, like it seems as though there are elements certainly that are super high tech. There's also, to your point, an incredible human burden on this kind of modern battlefield, and he gets into a lot of that. Not only the human burden, but like legitimately the consequences of not acknowledging that reality, which, you know, like I said, typically lead to mass carnage. So we also talk a little bit about the ACFT. So I don't know. You got anything else?
I think that's about it. Strap in.
Strap in and enjoy the ride. We'll see you guys on the other side.
Before we dive in to the actual content of the conversation here, this is a unique opportunity for me. Some listeners will know, some listeners won't know. You were my CG during my first civilian job after leaving active duty.
I'm excited to be here to watch this. This is great.
I think it's important for me to thank you for not firing me because of this podcast. I don't know the details. I was a couple layers down, so I wasn't like in the conference room very often or in your office very often. But I know from a couple instances that my name came up in those spaces, and I am appreciative that did not result in me losing my job. So that's a thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that was in jeopardy, but I think that, you were rightfully being provocative. And so you stayed within the bounds and you're here today. So
I stayed mostly within the bounds. I was looking, we're about to talk about the Ukraine study. And when you posted about it on LinkedIn, I sent you a message to see if you were interested in coming on the podcast. And it was not the first time we had exchanged messages on LinkedIn, because previously, well, I think I was one of your subordinates. You had shot me a message saying, "Hey, maybe don't talk about what you're talking about." That was.
I didn't know that. That's good.
I see that, by the way.
Maybe shut your mouth, bro.
Let's get on topic for a second here. Can you explain the scope of the Ukraine-Russia lessons study? What was it? Who was part of it? What did it find? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'll try to hit wave tops here. So when I was, I changed out of command, and I was in that beautiful transition period while you're still in uniform and getting paid. And you're the special assistant to, the TRADOC CG, which means you really don't have a job. And I was honestly, checking in every once in a while, but I was kind of also planning my, my RV trip with my wife, and buying a house and doing all those things you do kind of right at the end. And I got a call sometime around, I think, October, November. and mind you, I got out in 1 June, that said, hey, we, the Army, are kind of getting a black eye in terms of our sort of dismissive attitude with the fight that's going on in Ukraine. We've been so focused on China that we're losing sight of the fact that currently ongoing, there's large scale combat operations and we don't have a front row seat, but China does. Obviously, Russia's involved with it. You had DPRK in there, so the North Koreans are there. You have Iran that's sending drones. So everybody else got a front row seat. Even our allies were there, and we weren't. So I got asked to lead a team. This was working direct for the Chief of Staff of the Army, and I assembled experts from across CAC and across the Army to make sure I was able to cover all the warfighting functions. And then I was able to divide that team up. We had a team of folks that were back at Fort Leavenworth that were kind of our core writers. And then that was half of the team. The other half was a traveling team. All in total, it was about 60 folks, 30 in the rear, 30 forward. We went all over Germany, all over Poland. I went into Kyiv. We plugged into SAGU and USUR, so the organizations that are helping kind of with our allies and partners, helping the Ukrainians in this fight. And it got very technical very fast. And we kind of spread our tentacles. And every night we would dial in about 4 o'clock in the afternoon as a team and kind of try to assemble what it is that we were learning. And I'll be the first to tell you that I was naive in my understanding of that fight. I underestimated the intensity of this fight. So thought I knew it, given the jobs that I'd had and proximity to, TRADOC, but I had no idea how intense this fight was. And so I was asked to go see General Donahue. It was, I think, the first day after he took command. He said, "Hey, come see me." It was at night, like 9 o'clock in the morning. I went over there and he asked the question. He said, "I only have one question for you," because he stood up, SAGU. He said, "Were you wowed?" And I said, "Sir, I had no idea. I had no idea how intense this fight was." And so what I owe you and owe the Army and all the 4 stars that I briefed when I came back is a very candid report that shows what we need to do in the areas of innovation, manning, equipping, and training to be able to fight in this fight. It was a classified report, about 200 something pages. It went off to the Center of Army Lessons Learned, and then I went on the traveling roadshow and spoke at damn near every audience to kind of just. And I'll tell you, I did a video. It was like the last week I was in the Army. General Bredo said, "Hey, I need you to do a video because who's going to do this speaking role?" And I said, "Okay." So I went to the studio right there at Fort Eustis. I went in and said, "Hey, we got to do a quick video." It was about 45 minutes. I looked at the camera. It was single take. And that video is still playing at the pre-command course at Leavenworth for every brigade battalion commander as they come through. And that was over a year ago.
Is that video classified or unclassified?
It's unclass.
Can we have it?
I'll have it. The Army's.
God.
And what they did is they.
I'll make some calls.
Yeah, make some calls. You can talk to the aide man. But Murph, I think he worked with the team there. They've got it right there for Houston. They put in the slides. They did a decent job editing it so it can kind of relate. But it's not my greatest work, but what it does, I think, do is it communicates the how severe this is, how intense that fighting.
What? I mean, this is like maybe a loaded question, but you mentioned being wowed, obviously. Like, what did you expect? What did you walk away with? And I realize that's massively broad, but just off the top of your head.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll share some of the kind of the stories that normally grab people's attention. I was okay. So, what I'm not going to do is tell you a story that there's a lot of drones over there.
I heard something about that.
There's rumor that that's out there, but I will tell you that when I was standing with a Ukrainian corporal who was a UAV trainer there in Grafenbeer, she was sharing what she was doing to train the Ukrainians there in Germany before they went back. And by the way, they were training themselves in a lot of respects and training us because we learned very quickly that, what we were doing was archaic and what they were doing was really the cutting edge. And she said, "Let me show you the current picture of UAVs as it sits right now in Ukraine. And with her phone, she was able to pull up the live picture of all the drones that were currently in, being reported and moving around. And then she started to zoom in on her phone, and you could not see anything behind the thousands of little yellow icons that indicated the drones. And it wasn't until she got about within a kilometer that you could finally see the map behind that many icons. When one single Russian battalion reports 300 drones seen in a 24-hour period, and there are many battalions over there, vice a soldier that goes to NTC for 14 days force on force, and they may see a dozen drones in that period. You get the dichotomy that we're talking about. It's not a matter of if you are going to see a drone, it's if you're not going to see a drone. And today's fight, you must assume that everything you do, whether it's on the forward line or way in the rear, that you are going to be observed. And there's no more secrets anymore. So this will kind of allow you for a segue later on in terms of the readiness of a Ukrainian soldier as compared to an American soldier and the demands of that fight, because it's brutal. And I'll tell you one other one, because this is, a fun podcast, but we spent 3 days with 9 former Ukrainian brigade commanders, and it was at a place in Poland. And we were able to break bread and socialize with them in the evening. And for 3 days straight, what they did is they briefed us on all the lessons learned, and all of us were just soaking it up. And this one brigade commander told a story about the extensive efforts that the Ukrainian soldiers go through to make sure that they are not compromised. Right, so noise and light discipline takes on a whole new level of importance. Your signal that you emit, your heat signature, everything that comes off of your body is going to be observed. And so what they do is they go through extraordinary efforts to make sure that they're very clandestine, they're very camouflaged, and they use their own drones to use the heat, the thermal capability to double check themselves and make sure that they are completely blacked out and they're in their holes, and everything they do is very clandestine. So it's 3 people over here, 4 people over here. It's all disaggregated. Can't have these big formations. And despite all that effort, he tells a story about a soldier that comes out of his foxhole because he needs to relieve himself. And he very carefully comes out, goes behind the tree, urinates, and then very carefully goes back into his hide position. And what he forgot is that spot that he left on the ground is a hot spot that lasted for about 30 minutes, and the entire squad was wiped out.
Oh, God.
Is a recurring fact over there. And I think about the American soldier, and it's not that we aren't a better force, but we're not ready for that yet. And so my hypothesis in the beginning of this report, and we laid it all out, is that at that time, this is over a year ago, if you didn't use the overwhelming might of the American power that we bring and the technology we bring, if you just said, okay, take your best Army Brigade combat team or Marine regiment and give them the mission to go do a relief in place of a Ukrainian brigade as it sits right now in the forward lines, swap them out in essence, and leave the environment the same, which we would never do. If you did that at that time, I argued, and I stand by it today, that U.S. brigade would be combat ineffective in 72 hours, just because they would not be ready for that.
So I want to keep this on human performance. Our podcast is about human performance, but I got to chase the drone thing for a second, and we'll acknowledge that there are a million podcasts on drones in Ukraine. But I'm just curious, because I'm bringing the perspective. Before I did human performance, I was an intel officer, so I had experience with like Ravens, Shadows, and Gray Eagles, right? And my experience with those were watching my soldiers try to chuck these Ravens into the air, crashing them more than half the time. Like anybody who's launched Ravens knows you crash a ton of them and they fall apart when they crash. Shadows, which even at that size require an airstrip and an automated landing and takeoff system and sound like a lawnmower, so if it's within like 3 kilometers of you. Or Gray Eagles, which require like a whole airport to operate basically. And I was doing intel as recently as like 2017 in maneuver brigades. Like we were still using those in 2017. We probably still have guys flying Gray Eagles and Shadows right now in UAS platoons. How did we get so far behind? Like, is it just like the acquisitions system? Did we underestimate the pace? What is that?
Team, this episode of Mops and Mo's is brought to you by Train Heroic. Train Heroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that Train Heroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmos.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, Train Heroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmos.com/training to get your first week for free.
It's a bunch of stuff. And one of our first recommendations in the report was we need to take the acquisition model as it stands and smash it like a glass ball and rebuild it, because you're never going to meet the speed of need. And so I give great credit to the Department of War and what we are doing within the Army to reform acquisition. I'm a fan of what I'm seeing across the board, cutting out bureaucratic layers, empowering the PAEs, portfolio acquisition executives. I love what I'm seeing. And that stuff's not easy to do, that kind of a shift. And so I think we're headed in the right direction. And I made the argument that we were headed in the right direction. I still believe we are headed in the right direction, and all initiatives that are associated with transformation and contact. I like where the Army's going with that. It still must go faster, a lot faster. When the speed of change over there is anywhere between a week and 3 weeks, we're way behind. I stood in a Ukrainian drone battalion headquarters in Ukraine. And on the floor, they have the engineers that are manufacturing the drones, not like, field reps, but the actual engineers that are building them are on the floor. So as soon as a Russian drone gets down, a Ukrainian drone gets down, that information comes back to this battalion. They figure out what happened, and the changes are made immediately to adjust the drone for the next, mission. They, at the time, were expending 10,000 drones a month, expendable, just decreases. So put one on this frequency, send it in, it goes down. Change the frequency, send it in, it goes down. Change it again. And finally, when they open up, they find the gap, they flood the zone, and that window would only last for about 24 hours.
God, that is wild.
We don't do that. We spend years building this exquisite capability that is automatically obsolete by the time it hits the Ukraine. Ask the Ukrainians how many U.S. drones that they're using over there. It's like 90-something% is exclusively what they do. Now, granted, they like to pull all the cool stuff off of ours and make their own and then send it in, because they're not worried about proprietary information and reverse engineering things and cracking the code on, iPhones. They don't care about any of that stuff. I mean, when you're losing 1,200 people a day, your sense of urgency is completely different. So you got to respect it.
I gotta hurl one of these in here just because of my own curiosity, right? And granted, never served, always been a DoD civilian, but like, did we have any sense that this is where like modern warfare was headed, so to speak? And I say that as somebody growing up playing like Call of Duty and like, oh, this is what the future is gonna be, and then all of a sudden this conflict unravels and it's completely different than what you would have ever anticipated. Like, did we see this, or was this just totally?
Yeah. Here's how way I would describe it. We saw it. We wrote our doctrine to adjust to it. We knew things would be multi-domain. We knew we were familiar with, at least conceptually, of large-scale combat operations. None of that is a surprise. What the surprise was is that the future is now. It's happening already. I think that's what caught us a little bit flat-footed. It wasn't, let's try this out in a warfighter or some sort of simulation in the event that we someday run into this. When we looked at Ukraine, we're like, it is actually happening yesterday. It's happening now. So we got to stop talking about 2030, and we need to immediately get into our factories and start producing tomorrow in case we've got to do something. And so that's what got everybody energized, and rightfully so. And we saw it pivot immediately. And of course, we had a new administration come in, new secretary, and that was also a catalyst at the same time. What I will tell you, and it's not just because I work with industry now, is that I can promise you that the technology that we have is far superior. I'll just tell you, it's incredible. It's a matter of working it through the process, picking the right solution, building it into a budget, going through approval processes, testing, and everything else that goes with it, and then getting into the hands of the soldiers. Our current leadership within the Army and across the Department of War is trying to make that process, that iteration happen faster. But, we're creatures of habit that have been that way for a long, long time. It's just going to take a while. But our industry is amazing. It's incredible what we're able to produce. Tech that, if we did get it into the hands of the soldiers in Ukraine, it's game changer stuff. Totally game changer.
So that sounds like a great conversation for another podcast that we would continue
You
chasing.
opened up Pandora's box,
No,
Alex.
I
know.
would stay there all day.
And I want to stay there. Like, that is interesting. And I am certain that 200-page classified report has a ton of recommendations that have to do with tech, munitions, tactics, all of that kind of stuff. But your comment that caught my eye was when you said, what concerns you most is our state of physical and mental readiness.
Yeah.
Can you give me some context on that?
So first of all, and this is overdue. We probably should have done this 18 minutes and 34 seconds ago. Thanks for having me on this podcast. Because this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And when Alex reached out, I thought, yeah, this will be a good conversation for your podcast. And so I'm going to share with you the requirement for a Ukrainian soldier to get supplies to the front line. Okay. So we'll start that as the baseline, and then we can back up from that and we can start to think about how do we compare in that ability to do it. All right. So over a year ago, one of the things I learned was on the forward line of troops, where the two forces are actually fighting right along the line, right? So Russians on this side, Ukrainians on this side. They call that the FLOT, the forward line of troops. Where the fight is the most intense, the highest concentration of drones and everything else, electronic warfare, you name it, where every single move that you make is you can expect is going to be observed. And as soon as you are observed, your survival rate is, in the tank, because you're going to get, I stood on a tank. Speaking of tanks, I stood on a battle tank in Poland that had 7 clean holes through the top of it where FPV drones just went right through it like a hot knife through butter. And so I share that for context, because if you are trying to bring in soldiers, supplies, anything that's needed for the fight, and it looks like it's coming in a big green truck that's got large 4-wheel drive wheels on it or tracks, it's going to get destroyed. It's not going to survive. When you try to bring traditional combat power up into this very condensed area, it gets killed immediately. So then the question is, how do you get it there? Well, the Ukrainians now are using a lot of unmanned ground vehicles going in, but they still do a lot of just putting it on their back and getting it to the front line. So when I was there over a year ago, that distance was about 8 kilometers. It's about 5 miles or so. That it transitioned from what we would use, probably like a F-150 or a Ram 1500 or something that doesn't look like a military vehicle. It looks like any other vehicle out there. And they have the luxury of blending. We don't, it's in their backyard, it's in their farms, it's in their houses. They speak the language. They don't have to wear uniforms necessarily. We would have to think about all the supplies that we'd have to throw in a rucksack to get to the forward line. And then you start to really prioritize, right? You got to have food, you're going to have water, you're going to have ammunition, you're going to have some medical supplies to some certain degree. And ammunition is not light. And if you're moving mortar rounds and artillery rounds and things like this forward, it gets real, not to mention all the drones, the battery packs and everything else. So it all was going by foot for 5 miles to get it in. And I was thinking, at the time, and still today, given the current physical readiness of our soldiers, which I am intimately familiar given my previous assignments, as Alice can attest, I said, we're not ready. We're not even close to ready. Something's got to change physically. H2F is a great initiative and it's heading in the right direction. But what needs to start changing is the mindset of the soldier. They have to know, they have to be able to visualize this fight. And that was my objective of all the speaking I did. We say within the Army that as we look at new challenges and we want to affect change, we must first understand the problem. We must be able to visualize it, and then we can describe, and then we can direct, right? And I just wanted to achieve success by saying, I need leaders in the Army to be able to visualize this fight, and then I will have trust in them to figure out what they need to do in terms of training and equipping and everything else, right? Because we train our leaders well. But right now, I argue that not only could they visualize it, but they didn't even understand the fight. So, you take your average, maybe he's an overweight soldier. He's struggling with, across all domains. And he thinks that, well, this is perfectly fine because, I'm looking around and there's a lot that'll look like me and we're going to be just okay. Until you give them the mission and you describe this environment where it's so intense that your chance of survivability may not be beyond 72 hours, a week, 2 weeks, whatever the case may be in this particular fight. And oh, by the way, we're going to drop you off on the truck over here, and you got to take the rest of your stuff into the fight. And this is going to happen about every other day or so. And when injuries take place, you don't have a golden hour anymore. And you certainly are not going to have a medevac helicopter come in and take the wounded off. So now you're going to be dragging your buddies all the way back so you can save their life. You get the idea. And this just gets compounded and gets tougher and tougher when you have this tyranny of distance where you don't have the luxuries of what we're used to in terms of, vehicles and everything else. Now, we have capability to make sure that we're able to protect that. And we'll leave it at that, right? We're able to create an environment where we can operate some of our traditional stuff. But not all of that's in the hands of soldiers yet.
How do you, because like you tell this story, right? And there's this report. Is there a way to change the psyche and the culture around the urgency for this readiness? Or do you just kind of have to wait and watch dozens and dozens of your buddies die before you're like, oh shit, maybe we need to do this differently?
That's at the heart of the issue. That's it. That is the challenge that all leaders are wrestling with right now.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to actually the recommendation I had from the leadership that was over there in Europe when I sat down with the leaders that are actually, helping to orchestrate and assist the Ukrainians. There was no doubt, and I shared it with the Chief of Staff of the Army, and it's written in my letter, my cover letter, that the number one priority was leadership development. We have to make sure that our leaders that are responsible for the training, the welfare, and equipping, that they understand this fight. So every training event that you do, whether it's at a national training center or if it's home station training, you have to bring in this environment. You can't wish it away. You can't build training objectives that are so easy to achieve because we're crawl, walk, and running. So we have to crawl and we spend the entire rotation doing the crawl phase. That's unacceptable. Soldiers must experience how tough this is. That's the only way they're going to learn from it. And so they have to be kind of submerged in the most difficult training environments we can afford to do for them safely. We don't want to lose soldiers during training, so they can experience it and understand it themselves. Keep in mind, those Ukrainian soldiers, everything I described before, oh, by the way, it gets really cold. Yeah. You're not going in some plywood, hut on your fob. You're going to pull up underneath the tree and suck it up.
Man.
So I'm thinking through how we implement this in our environment, and I don't have enough context on the realities of the Ukrainian training pipeline and what resources they have and don't have to really understand it. You're talking about these demands. I can't imagine that the Ukrainian solution is to like embed strength and conditioning coaches in the training environment and like rotate occupational therapists to make sure the foxholes look great and they're laid out properly to not have ergonomic issues. Like what have they figured out processes that you like, is the training pipeline even long enough to do much for them? Like,
So great question. I'll get right to the answer first. The mindset is there. Okay. And then everything goes from that. They're losing family members. They're losing loved ones in high numbers. They're losing their property. They're losing their way of life. They're losing. So their sense of urgency is not the same as the third party American soldier that lands on some foreign terrain and fights. It is personal. And so they must persevere. And so they're going to have a drive that it may not exist in, the average American soldier that's going to be put into a country. Now, if we were fighting, on the shores of New York or something like that, it'd probably be a little bit different, right? I don't want to mess with our country because every one of us is going to come out with all 50 firearms we own. It's going to be a mess, right? So, so it starts with the mindset. Their basic training at the time when I was there, Alex, was 30 days. And they added some additional training in there in the areas of like electronic warfare and stuff like that, of which we train zero, because it's so important. In fact, they added 30 hours of electronic warfare. I don't think they're doing so much in the physical stuff, but they're in a little bit different shape than the average American. So it starts with, and they, when the war kicked off, they were actually, the average age of the soldiers over there was in the 30s, 40s, and even 50s. They were trying to preserve their youth to make the next generation. And it wasn't only until recently that they had to dip into that kind of the 18 to 22-year-old mark. And so they had guys that were 32-year-old diesel mechanics and wherever walks of life, and they were going into the fight, and where they were physically is what you got.
so for context for a second, I just moved houses. I used to have back here, and Drew will appreciate this, the Soft American by JFK. It'll be hung up again once I get this house set up. We'll get there. But I'll borrow a quote if I can find it quickly here. The stamina and strength which the defense of liberty requires are not the product of a few weeks basic training or a month's conditioning. These only come from bodies which have been conditioned by a lifetime of participation in sports and interest in physical activity. Our struggles against aggressors throughout our history have been won on the playgrounds and corner lots and fields of America. So it sounds like your commentary on like how do we achieve the physical preparation necessary for this jives with something I've been saying for a while, which is kind of at a certain point you have to stop pulling bodies out of the river and head upstream to figure out where they fell in. Like solving this problem requires a societal level investment in physicality, in sports, in public education. Like is that something you think is reaching the people who can actually make an influence on that variable?
No, I'm optimistic when you have things like Make America Healthy Again. You live in the same society that I live in. I feel like I have seen a little bit of an adjustment here, and it started actually before Kennedy started doing the Make America Healthy Again. We started to see some initiatives that, just in terms of behaviors and habits that Americans were taking on, less alcohol consumption and the like. So I see some positive things that are. I totally agree with you. It's a societal problem, and you've heard me talk about it. It's just you guys trained me on that, by the way. It's a societal problem. And I love those videos we would show of soldiers in the 50s that are cruising across all the monkey bars, and they're in their like fatigue pants and white tank tops, and everybody is just like 12% body fat. And I'm just thinking, yeah, if you were to cut that same video today, I mean, the difficulty just with grip strength hanging on to the bar, well, just one bar stationary,
they'd be on profile. Those guys be on profile.
It would be, yeah. So I agree with you. I can only hope that it goes back to the foundation of our families and our education bases, and we start to, encourage athletics again and team sports and all those things that JFK reported on in that article when we did the study in comparison to our European friends and how we compared. That's what I think was the catalyst in 1960 when he wrote that.
I want to ask, and this is a question I've had on my mind for a long time, because within H2F, and I think really within any kind of embedded human performance model in the military, the emphasis is often on working out. Like, you have the PT test, you got all the equipment, you do the thing, it's the fitness stuff. Injury prevention is tied into that a little bit because you can report all the metrics and command can see the stuff. But the cognitive stuff, the spiritual stuff is squishy, and we kind of we don't get it. And when I see all of the stuff going on in Ukraine, and I imagine, like you mentioned, you're under a tree, it's freezing cold, you're stuck in a trench, you can't even go pee because you and all of your buddies will die. It makes me think that in that kind of war, your AFT score doesn't matter, but your ability to cognitively process everything that's going on around you and still perform at a level that effectively will determine life or death. Like, how do we message that to this emerging model of human performance to hey guys, that's really important. So figure it out.
Yeah, I think you got to submerge soldiers in that environment the best we can. And I'll push back a little bit about, the physical piece maybe not being as critical. I totally is. So, you always want to train harder than you fight. And if you are able to train to a level of severity or difficulty, where it really stresses you both mind and body, then what that does is that builds confidence and that makes you a little bit more successful. You can then say, I've been through worse, I've been through this before. And that's just so important. That's why schools like Ranger School are so important for our soldiers and many of these difficult courses that we go through. That's not a secret. What we got to do across the totality of the Army is up our game across the full spectrum. Training centers, physical fitness. And this is sometimes we run into, I can tell you for a fact, and now that I'm retired, we ran into some significant resistance with the ACFT. It was very, very frustrating. And I'll go on record to say that there were about two of us there at the very end that were standing on an island. And that was Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston and me. And we were,
remember those last days.
We said we want to keep the leg tuck nation, right? We want to keep this thing. There's science behind this thing. And our argument was that if you challenge soldiers, they'll rise up to the challenge. If you lower that bar, then you are going to just wallow in the band of mediocrity forever. And it has to have teeth to it. So if you do not pass, then you do not serve. And once you start to impose that kind of rigor, then you'll see that people will rise to the challenge. And it's contagious if leaders adopt it, which is another challenge. You have to have leaders that embrace it. But once you start to get that little bit of competition going on within units, it can be contagious, and it's a great thing. We had opposing forces in there. They were concerned about recruitment and some other stuff. And I understand the challenges they were facing and why they went towards those solutions. And I think it had to do with lacking the faith that soldiers would rise to the challenge. That was the catalyst of the problem. And I didn't want to come off of that. And I didn't.
You've created an opportunity here for a brief story, and it's good timing for this conversation, because if I'm not off on the date, I think we are about 4 years and 1 week since the Army officially announced it was removing the leg tuck from the Army Combat Fitness Test. And I had already made the leg tuck a pretty core part of my identity.
Such a nice way of phrasing that.
I had that sticker on the back of my book, Alex, for years.
General Kline knows. But I was at Fort Bliss on one of the early H2F implementation trips we did when that announcement came out. And people in that space knew about Leg Tuck Nation and they knew that I cared about it. And so it started with a bunch of like H2F people at Fort Bliss coming up, and we took pictures of them doing leg tucks, and I was giving them Leg Tuck Nation stickers, and I was heated, so I was posting a lot. And then people who followed the page started tagging me in videos of them doing leg tucks in different places around the country in different units and on Strikers and on Abrams and everywhere. And so I started like compiling these things and posting them and saying what I thought pretty publicly. And as we leave Fort Bliss, I think I was in the airport. I think I was like in one of the seats outside the gate in the El Paso airport. And I get a one sentence email from Randy Reddy, who you know. And all the email said was, your posts are getting noticed at the Pentagon, ... Nothing else. And my plane's boarding. So I have to close my computer and go. And I get on this plane thinking, man, I might find out when I land that I'm fired. Like that. This feels possible at this point. I've leaned in
back to the very beginning, Alex. It's not that many of us disagreed with what you were doing, but we liked you on our team and we wanted you to stay in the Army.
So I was very stressed for like an hour or two or whatever on the plane. Flight lands, and I think I landed to a text from Maria saying you needed a restock on Leg Tuck Nation stickers. And I was pretty sure I was good to not get fired after that.
Yeah, you were good. Let us carry the heavy rucksack to prove your career, and then yes, that was fun. Maria was a huge fan of the Leg Tuck Nation.
Oh yeah, I haven't talked to her in a couple weeks, but we still stay in touch.
Well, what's wild now is like people who follow the brand, like some people don't know what the leg tuck is. Like it's like, wait, what do you guys? What does that mean?
We have soldiers who have enlisted, served their time, and separated since the leg tuck was removed from the test. That's terrifying to me.
R.I.P.
We'll save more in-depth Leg Tuck Nation conversations for another day. We'll get back on topic, but I saw some of the comments on your original post about this issue with physical and mental preparation for that kind of battlefield. And somebody alluded to conversations with European allies during this process. I'm curious what perspectives you heard related to human performance from countries that are a little closer to this fight.
I don't recall any specific. There was a European officer. You see, he took some of one post in particular, and he kind of reframed it himself. And he sent me a note before he posted and said, I read your post and I like it, and I'm going to send. He was like in the Dutch Army or something like that. And he said, I'm going to make mine look like this, and I'm going to send it out. And I'm like, hey, it's I'm not trying to get a commission here. Knock yourself out, man. But no, nothing specific, Alex. When I was over there, and SAGU's got lots of our allies and partners that are tied into that operations center over there. But part of our conversations as a team, as I alluded to in the beginning, we would meet we'd all dial in at 4:00 every afternoon and try to work our way through each one of these functions. And we decided that we needed to carve out specifically the physical and mental preparedness of our soldiers needed to be highlighted as a recommendation that we had to, partly because of the world I came from in H2F, and I don't want to make that mark, but also because at the time, and I won't use names, but I'll just say the senior commanding general over there in Europe at the time was most concerned about the mindset of the U.S. soldier in the next fight. And I agree with him there. It starts with knowing what this might be like. Because if you don't, you go in blind, then you don't have the drive to do really, you can decide when you want to adjust levers and not do something and do something. But if you know that you're getting ready to step into the hornet's nest, that makes everything else a little bit easier. Where you're going to accept risk, what supplies you're not going to deal with, how physical you need to be, how far do you need to be. you know that if somebody gets injured, you already know that you're going to have to drag them all the way out. This is not like discovery learning at the last minute and then this becomes drama for you. It's you're already planning for it, and that's just critical. I'm convinced if we get that right, it'll only help.
I think somewhat wrapping up the Ukraine piece, I think Drew might hit you with a curveball on it too. But you mentioned at the top that the outputs of your study are classified. Given that, as leaders are responding, you talked about the criticality of leadership development, getting people prepared to train soldiers for these things. As we fight to get soldiers and leaders to care enough to make the changes required to achieve that, what would you point them to understand why this is so critical? Is there anything that like is out there in the unclassified space that really sends the message?
There is, and it's spreading pretty well, I think, within the Army now. It really is. 14 months ago, not at all. It was a dark hole, and so we have really started to turn. The only reason why we classified it was to protect the Ukrainians. That's why. It wasn't that we were divulging anything in there that was, concerns for us. It was because we built a level of trust after 70, 80 days that we wanted to have them open up. And I assured them that I would classify that report so I wouldn't, have something out there that was floating around that the Russians would get their hands onto. That's the only reason. So the Center of Army Lessons Learned has it. They posted it on their call site, the classified site, a long time ago. We probably could have done better I think there is a D-class portion that's that they have since kind of extracted out of there. And then we built an unclassified deck that I used when I spoke all over the place. I know that slide deck is out there floating around somewhere. And then again, I went and spoke, and then there's videos, but it's not just me, but I'm one small piece of that kind of solution. The leaders now that have, are more aware of this fight are taking it upon themselves to make sure that they are preparing. It's going to be a slow turn. I mean, it just is. We're steering a battleship, and what I think that's been encouraging is that, like, several of the centers of excellence and units have sent like liaisons over there to Germany to plug into SAGU, and they have that on a rotation. So you get some soldiers over there that are seeing firsthand, how difficult this is.
What does it's kind of hard because we're in it, right? I mean, it's happening right now. But what is like the next fight look like? I mean, what's the drone of the future, I guess, so to speak? Like, what does this kind of conflict evolve into as we recognize what it is, prepare for it, and then the enemy like pivots and throws something else at us, if that makes sense?
I think that a lot of their tech can do a lot. It can't do it all, but there is some tech out there that can make what I described earlier kind of obsolete, and I'll just leave it at that. I think that when we lived off of 9 principles of all services did and have for decades, and it's things like, surprise and mass and offense and economy of force. And, there's 9 of them that are out there. And I argued here recently that 6 of those 9 are heavily challenged because of how this war, how the future of warfare looks, and actually current warfare looks. And don't use Iran as a benchmark. That's not, lobbing very expensive missiles into the backyard of Iran is not what I'm describing. Eventually, at some point, in order for us to convince a nation and the people to be able to adjust or change in the direction that we want to compel them, it historically takes boots on the ground to do that. It has to take leaders that are talking to leaders on their turf. It takes that level of finality. We'll see how this thing ends up. So I'll just leave it at that. We want to don't compare to what you see in Iran or what you saw in Serbia years ago during Operation what was that? I can't remember what it was, but when we took out Slobodan Milosevic and Task Force Hawk and all that time period. The future of warfare, I think, is going to still be challenged in those areas and those 6 principles, and leaders are going to have to learn how to adapt. Our doctrine is going to have to adapt, and then we've got to train accordingly so we can, meet that challenge. We're somewhere in the middle of that mosh pit in that story right now. It's just take some time.
Before we transition to a grab bag of ACFT and H2F things, anything we should have asked you that we didn't on Ukraine?
No, I have fun editing all that.
Speaking of technology, that's what AI is for.
We got
is
a
editing
drone that does it for us. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
My workflow is much faster now.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you using that. Yeah, just kind of, and this is, I don't care if it's record or not, but in the area of what we can do now, the future of warfare, kind of going back to your, Drew, you have to still assume that everything you do is seen. And this is like, not just on the forward edge, this is 20, 30, 40 kilometers, back.
Yeah.
This is where we get into discussions like contested logistics and how even manned rotary wing even operates now. This can go, I could talk for hours in this particular, in this topic, but all of that has changed. This is what we call a revolution in military affairs. This is a new one for us. And anybody that argues otherwise, I would love to go toe to toe with. This is a revolution in military affairs. Kind of like, the radio was, like gunpowder was. There's several examples. This one is really got a massive change to the way we fight. So, and we're working through it. And we have some very impressive tech that can help for sure there. But this comes with the mindset of a soldier. All right. Now, I don't think there's anything else, Alex. Go ahead and with your grab bag.
First one is hopefully a fun one. It is based on a rumor, so hopefully the rumor's accurate. But as the ACFT was rolling out, I heard numerous rumors that you were very interested in where you stood compared to the rest of the Army's general officers. Did you track that? Did you track that? And where did you stand?
I did. You're damn right I did. I'm just comparing with the next guy. So, we had access to DTMS. And so I'll protect the names, but some teammates that you might know divulged this information. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I may have shared with a couple where they stood, and it was behind me. I think I was, you'd have to ask that person that we both know, but I want to say I was like 11 or something like that. I was close to the top 10. I know who number 1 was. I'll protect everybody in that list. But
who's number 1?
I know. What the hell? It was CD Donahue. Yeah.
All right. I could see that. I mean,
also say that not everybody took it. So the numbers get skewed. Because I know a couple generals that would blow it away. And they just, at that time when that data set was pulled, they weren't in there. So
who is the highest?
I give it about 50% accuracy, but I'm not saying Donahue wouldn't still be at the front, but I know another guy that would probably be right at that top, and he just wasn't on the list yet.
I mean, I was trying to get up there. I know you were talking about me, right? I get it.
Yeah, it was good. It was all, we're all very competitive people, especially at the senior level. And so,
friend of the podcast, Steve Gilland, General Gilland, I know from a few reports, knocked out a max score. So we got some other contenders out there.
And when I looked at it, it was the old standard.
Yeah.
The Hardage standard, by the way.
We can talk about that.
Back in my day.
Black standard, and it was substantially different than what Gillen knocked out. And I'm not taking anything from Gillen, but
he's going to listen. You might get an email from this.
Oh, I'm good with it, man. I'm so good with it.
All right.
Good man.
So we know, like, it's been established here. You played a pretty key role at a pretty touch and go time during the implementation of both the ACFT and H2F. navigating some political winds around the leg tuck and run times and gender norming and scoring scales and how it would affect recruiting and how it affected chaplains and medical officers and all these different things. From your having watched it evolve since you left, from your current vantage point, how do you think we've done carrying the torch since then?
I'm glad it's still there. I was disappointed of where we landed when we did land, and everybody knows it. I was disappointed with what we did with reducing the standard by quite a bit because of the concern over recruiting. I think we missed the mark on what was causing the recruiting problem, and I think we know now exactly, where some of that lied. So. Just culturally, we were struggling, and it was affecting our ability to recruit. And when we landed there, I was very disappointed. The only thing that was a saving grace is that we didn't go back to the old APFT. And so we were able to pat ourselves in the back and be grateful that we moved us into this new arena with the hope that as time progressed, that we would be able to raise the bar, challenge our soldiers, and increase the physical readiness of the force as they got healthier. I don't know where we sit there, but when I hear things like certain events getting tossed, I just don't know where we sit right now. 2 of the 6 are gone now for a variety of reasons, and I'll just.
So we'll take it to a slightly personal level for a second. We've already talked about how competitive you were in the seat while you were implementing the test. Now that you're on the other side, now that you're retired, you get to make a lot more individual choices about how you approach fitness. Has your approach changed at all?
I think it's about the same. Admittedly, maybe I'm a slightly more lazy now. When I retired, I facial hair was fun for a while. you know, uh, we went on a 60-day trip all through the Rockies, dragging an RV. So I wasn't necessarily out there beating the pavement. But I think I maintain pretty well to this day, and I will for the rest of my life. I know how important it is in my later years, and so I've got way too many hobbies that I enjoy, and that it would make me sad if I wasn't able to do things like climb a deer stand and pull a bow, and draw a bow, and you know all kinds of things out there, kayak, whatever the case may be. But my dad can still climb a deer stand to this day, and that's where I want to be when I'm his age.
Before we let you go, we have to throw some closers at you. And this one is interesting because we don't often get to talk to people that actually have had keys to kingdoms, so to speak. But where you sit now, where you sat prior, like if you had the keys to the kingdom, right? If you, for a day, you could change anything you wanted to about the Army, Department of War, whatever, like what would how would you craft that? And this could have a Ukrainian slant. It could have a PT slant, however you want it to look. What would you do if you had a day?
Yeah, I couldn't do it in one day.
I knew that was, yeah, I know.
I could levy an executive order, but it would just fall flat somewhere probably. If I had a magic wand, maybe, I would want every soldier to be able to see the fight of tomorrow or even today through the lens of a Ukrainian soldier. So they would understand that perspective. Even if they could fight for a day in that fight or fight for a weekend in that fight, they would be able to understand. Would drastically change the learning curve to be almost vertical for us. It would serve as a catalyst for many in our Army to change behavior. I think if I had a super magic wand, I would want many in the political sphere to be able to see it through that lens as well. And that would just help in the area of, national defense. And if that magic wand had any juice in it, given this conversation, I would say that, you know, for our youth and how they are developed at home and on the sports fields and in our schools, um, I would want what Alex described, that being a culture that we haven't seen in since probably the 50s, where when you ask a kid what he loves to do, the first thing out of his mouth is, I love to play baseball or soccer or basketball, or and you just don't hear that from our kids anymore. And that would be helpful. And that's for this. Now, if I had lots of magic wands, there's other things I would do. But for this conversation,
That's fair.
He skipped the one about putting the leg tuck back in the PT test, but we'll
Yeah,
assume
that's
that was
day
implied.
2. That's day 2. On the second day.
I'd put $1 million in your pocket too. But
So I have 2, kind of 3, since one of them is a 2-parter, closers to hit you with. One of them is one of our classics. One of them is very specific because you might be one of the most qualified people to answer this question, and I've thought about it a lot. I mentioned the LinkedIn message exchange before I invited you on this podcast. This is back when I worked for you. I don't remember what I posted, but I posted something to do with clarifying language in the National Defense Authorization Act. And you sent me a note. It's a real simple one. You just said, Alex, it's probably best to avoid speculating on politics over social media, especially as a member of our H2F directorate. And you clarified that I was witnessing politics in action. Language was being put in the NDAA, not necessarily to become law, but potentially to spark a response, gain acknowledgement, drive a conversation forward. Layers to the game that I did not fully understand at the time.
yeah,
This was all on LinkedIn.
That's all context to ask you a simpler question, which is, we watched the physical fitness test of the Army become a political football while we were there. Do you think that we can ever put that back in the box? Is fitness now political instead of something the service can make decisions on?
yeah, I think so. I think so. With the right leadership, we can put it back in the box. I think we allowed it to get there in some respects. And there was some risk aversion there, to say the least. What frustrated me was the United States Marine Corps was able to simply say, this is our test, and I appreciate your opinion, or I don't appreciate your opinion. That's what we're going to do. And how you look at that, and then you look at us, and you think, how did we get into this mix? And I think there was an opportunity there. Again, this has to do with risk, but I've always wondered what would have happened in reality, not based off an assumption, if at the time leadership had just said, we appreciate your opinion, but we need you to trust us to develop a test that is right for our soldiers, and I'm making a decision that we're going to implement this standard, and that's the end of it.
I have thought about that possibility a lot. I think we are on the same page in terms of believing that soldiers are actually capable of rising to bigger challenges than we give them credit for.
We saw it many times.
Yeah. All right. Well, to come back from the edge of getting too political, classic closer. Over the course of working in this space, being exposed to human performance, in uniform, retired, first, what is something that you've believed strongly that you've doubled down on? And then second, what is something you have changed your mind on?
Oh, man, see, I needed to read ahead on that.
Got him.
The second one, there's probably several examples of. I need a minute to kind of think of when but I'll tell you that I know throughout my career, I have gone in with a certain position based off of the facts that I had, and then either based off of the influencers or the environment changing, that I have done 180s before, full, I've turned around on some things. I have to think about it. It wasn't ACFT. Uh, but there are, and I apologize, I can't think of one off the top of my head. And that your first question was, um,
It's the opposite scenario. It's something that has been confirmed to you repeatedly. You may not have been sure about it at first, but you have doubled down on.
yeah, it can be. This is not really related to the topic, but there are certain offenses that, if committed, that I was unforgiving on, because they were so egregious. Um, and within the authorities that I had, I took advantage of, or I exercised, I should say, those authorities to make sure that justice was served. Because there are some that, if you're able to go within the non-judicial punishment, it doesn't go to court martial, then it was just a red line for me. So, and it normally had to do with things like sexual assault and things like that. If they were to decide to avoid show that it was hammer time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have, back to you, that one. I mean, I have reversed out before. You get set in a certain way, and you've got to go in based off of time. You're like, okay, this is the way I feel about it. You start to get a little sense from those that are close around you, and you start to move out in a direction, and then the environment starts to change, and you go, "Ooh, we were off on that one." But as it relates to this topic, you all armed me very, very well with the science behind this, and um, and although given our best efforts to try to articulate that, we had folks that were come in from angles that were not based on science, not based on fact. They were based off of emotion, and they were tipping the scales. Um, and so I would, in that case, I would double down. And I was unsuccessful at the end of the day of, things like leg tuck. Just couldn't get it over the wire. I got told to shut up in color after a while. So
I have been told to shut up on color on that exact topic a number of times.
yeah, I've been told to shut up in color on many things in my career.
Man.
Well, sir, I appreciate you making time for this. I appreciate the chances to revisit a couple CIMT, ACFT experiences. I think I will try for people listening to track down directions to go find some of the unclassed resources on this. I have a feeling some of them are on the CAC required side of Center for Army Lessons Learned. But at the very least, I can confirm what's out there and let people know how to go find it. So we'll see what we can do there.
There's a ton of open source stuff out there, though. Just gobs of it that's out there that is, honestly, it doesn't have our recommendations in it, but it's pretty compelling stuff that's out there. You can.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Team, welcome to the Mops and Mo's after party. And I gotta say, fresh off of this one, man, I love talking to GOs, specifically like retired GOs, because that's general officers, if you're unaware. They just know stuff. Like, they know stuff, and they know stuff at a level that the rest of us, like, we may know the same things, but they're piecing it together with a lot of other information that they know to just get a different perspective on something. And I know you and I have been kind of talking about wanting to have a conversation about Ukraine for a long time, and this one did not disappoint. Not even from just like, for sure, not from a political standpoint, and hopefully people didn't hear this and think that was the angle, but just like a recognition of the kind of hypothetical future war we're talking about is like happening in real time. And to just kind of conceptualize some of the things he talked about, like, oh, hey, all of this stuff that you train on, just pretend that that's not there. And also there's a bunch of like drones that are just going to kill you. Like, that's wild. People can't comprehend that.
I might come back to talking about Ukraine in this little outro segment here.
Please.
But frankly, for me, I didn't even realize this until just now, like seconds ago, as you were talking. This was not intentional. It just happened to work out. We have now had on the podcast really the last two senior leaders that were left fighting for the leg tuck in the arena where the decisions were made. We had Tony Grinston, and now we have had General Kline. And you know, I've had people tell me to shut up and stop advocating for it. And it's dumb, and that ship has sailed, and forget about it. And these guys tried as long as they could. I remember some like last minute emails about like, what if we didn't require elbow flexion so people who didn't have the upper body strength could just do a big leg raise? Like just like last ditch efforts to keep it in there, figure something out. And I do, like you heard me say it at the beginning, he kept it light, but I know there were times where like people in that headquarters went into his office, or at least a person in the headquarters, and some people will know who I'm talking about now, went into his office demanding my head. Like this guy's out of control. He's saying crazy stuff. You got to do something about him. And I don't know what made General Kline feel like it was okay to like leave me my space and like let me do my thing. But Mops and Moses only here today because he decided not to drop the axe. So that's just,
I think it's because he knew down the road, you know, he would need us. He would need this platform to have the episode just as if he needs us. Yeah, right. I kind of want to like, I hadn't even really thought about that with the Marine Corps. They just like did it, and we should
That's
talk
exactly
to
what
them.
happened. There was some political pushback when they were doing it. Like people in Congress were like, whoa, what's going on with this? And they just didn't stop.
Can we talk to, let's find one of those people.
That's
like,
a good point. Yeah.
Who's their General Kline? Let's find that
question.
out. Yeah, man, like I said, just, it's cool
before we continue,
please.
I think the audience for the podcast and the social media are slightly different. I've posted about this on the social media before. I will try and find the chart and link to it in the show notes if I remember. But there's an exceptionally compelling chart about like percentage of female Marines who choose to do pull-ups on the test. Because like they set it up where you can do push-ups, but it caps out the score you can achieve. So if you want to go past that, you got to do pull-ups. And like they have risen to the challenge. Like women in the Marine Corps just do pull-ups, most of them.
Yeah. Like it goes back to the time that, you know, the age-old story, and I forget her name. I'm not going to Google it in real time. Apologies. But like the woman who ran the first marathon. And they just assumed like, oh my God, if women run this far, they'll just die. And I think, you know, full credit to all the women out there. Like they will do they'll do the thing. They're fully capable. I don't know.
I have the data. I was able to find it. Prior to 2017, women in the Marine Corps had the option of doing a time flexed arm hang instead of doing pull-ups.
It's harder, to be honest with you.
And so in 2016, when that was still an option, only 16% of Marine Corps women chose to do pull-ups on their PFT. 2017, 65% of women chose to do pull-ups on their PFT. And it's been climbing since then. We're like over 3/4 at this point, presumably based on this trend. My data that's what I'm looking at only goes to 2018. And interestingly, the average number of pull-ups they achieved, like the ones who chose to do it, didn't really change. It's just that everybody now does them.
Yeah.
Like the number didn't go down when a bunch of women who weren't doing pull-ups before started doing it. They rose to that challenge. Like if you're a woman in the Marine Corps, you probably do like 7+ pull-ups. That's pretty freaking cool.
It's because, to put it simply, it's because the people who sit at the highest levels and make these decisions don't work out.
I think, I don't know if we ever got into that with Sergeant Major Grinston when we had him on the podcast, but I think he tried really hard to run an ACFT outside of Congress, where like members of Congress could just come do it so they could like experience it before they made decisions.
Of course.
I don't think it ever really happened.
That's what I'm saying. Outside, like, I don't know who can make this decision, but like you should have a series of rooms and decisions are made in these rooms. And to get into these rooms, you have to have met certain requirements, one of which should be a specific PT. Otherwise, like, I don't care what you have to say. I don't know.
Are you suggesting make Congress fit again?
Ooh. Well, that implies not to like bash Congress, but like where they, I mean, like, was John Adams like cranking out leg tucks?
I don't know. Good question.
That'd be an interesting one. Like, what was the physical readiness of the first Continental Congress? Probably, I don't know. Any thoughts? I
need Dr. Reese to figure that one out for us.
I don't know if he goes back that far. That'd be a good question.
We're hitting a lot of CIMT people tonight, but Dr. Reese, our like history of fitness guy, I need to know, like, were early members of Congress fitter than current members of Congress? I don't know.
I mean, they died of like cholera, so probably not.
But they might have been jacked when they died of cholera. I don't know.
That's a good point, actually. Maybe we'll dive into that one. But before we close, any thoughts on Ukraine?
I think you know this, longtime listeners know that Drew and I are communicating through a document while we're talking to the guests. So we're lining up the next question, figuring out if we're going to change direction, things like that.
We're pros, guys. Pros.
And Drew asked him the keys to the kingdom question. And I wrote my prediction in there of like what he might say. I was wrong. I was incorrect. But man, he started talking about like the realities of like, if you need to move artillery rounds in, you're doing it on your back with all your water, with all your food, with all your medical supplies over these miles. Can't have a heat signature. Can't even pee on a tree because it'll leave a heat signature. I started to imagine in my mind how horrifically brutal it would be to do like a version of NTC that simulates that. And I'm not talking like, yeah, I know like JRTC, NTC are doing large scale combat operations type stuff. I'm sure it's great, whatever, but like a genuine, like build that scenario with that type of terrain. Like commanders are not battlefield circulating, because if they would die. Like
sounds like
last
everyone
5 miles to the forward line of troops is only dismounted. You cannot move anything. And like, I think that at some point, like an exercise like that may be necessary to test how our capabilities perform in that environment. And I think it would be an awful thing to be a part of. But I think to some degree, that is what is necessary to test our systems against the reality of that kind of conflict.
Yeah, my takeaway was basically that like everyone's going to die. Like if no matter where you are. And I was sitting there thinking of like, you know, the unnamed soldier sitting in his car vaping before PT, like scrolling his phone, like not giving a shit, because presumably if you're not a certain type of MOS, you're probably not going to get it. But like, it sounds like everyone's going to die, and there's going to be a drone and it's coming for you regardless of where you're at, and you're just going to die. So that's fun to realize. I don't know if I have any other thoughts outside of that. But yeah, you should work out so that you die looking good, I guess.
That's dark.
Yeah, no. But hey, on a lighter note, guys, we'll see you next week. Thanks for hanging out, and head on a swivel, because they're drones, man. They're everywhere. Heads up.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us.
The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.